I'm going to speak about the topic lower extremity arterial disease, medical management, and decision making. Decisions regarding the management of a peripheral arterial disease of the lower extremity pose a unique challenge as it is multiple things are involved in it for the decision making. These are underlying pathology and its natural history, anatomic defect, degree of ischemia, availability of the conduit, comorbid conditions, functional status of the individual, ambulation potential, and suitability of the anatomy for successful revascularization. For the decision making, initially you have to confirm that the patient's symptoms are due to a PAD. Other symptoms like venous claudication, urogenic claudication has to be ruled out, and then you have to grade the symptom severity as intermediate claudication or a critical limb ischemia. Whereas next is to distinguish it is an acute or a chronic disease, and next to undergo any procedure to perform any revascularization procedure or not, you have to see even the functional status of the individual, how far the procedure will be helpful for the individual. The clinical presentation of a PAD may be a wide spectrum, like maybe asymptomatic or may present with atypical symptoms, usually in females, intermittent claudication, or with a critical limb ischemia involving the rest pain, ulceration or necrosis or gangrene, and even acute limb ischemia. The main decision making depends on whether it is a severity, intermittent claudication, or a CLTI, as both the forms of the disease behave in a different way and the natural course of the disease is different. Claudication usually has a benign history. Usually they seek the treatment mainly for the pain relief on ambulation, that is limiting their lifestyle. There's less chance of limb loss compared to critical limb ischemia, which is a severe disease usually associated with severe cardiovascular comorbidities. There are older age group with a poor health and more chance of limb loss. As I told, mainly it is different because of the major differences in the natural histories and the expected clinical outcomes after treatment. In a case of critical limb ischemia, usually 1 year outcomes, now only 45% of the people are alive with two limbs, 30% undergo amputation, and mortality rate is also high, 25%. Whereas it is in asymptomatic PAD and typical claudication, 5 year outcomes are only 5 to 10% progress to critical limb ischemia and amputation. As there is a lot of difference between the natural history of each intermittent claudication and critical limb ischemia, the main management changes. Medical management, risk factor modification is the first step as atherosclerotic is a systemic disease. In any patient with a PAD, whether he is having symptoms or no symptoms or even depends on severity, independent of the severity of the symptoms, risk factor modification is a part of a treatment. These are similar to the coronary artery disease. There are primary risk factors like advanced age, tobacco use, diabetes, dyslipidemia, hypertension. Additional risk factors like non-Hispanic black race, chronic renal insufficiency, elevated homocysteine levels. Among these, the age and black race are non-modifiable risk factors. Rest of the things can be modified. Risk factor modification mainly includes the smoking cessation, that is complete smoking cessation, lipid management, blood pressure control, blood sugar control, and the antiplatelet therapy. Smoking cessation. Smoking has a multitude of effects leading to atherosclerosis and even cardiovascular events in the form of the reactive oxygen species, carbon monoxide, released endothelial dysfunction, inflammation, etc. Aim is a complete abstinence from the tobacco cessation, tobacco use. Alcohol decreases the success rate. Consider reducing the alcohol intake. Identify the triggers for smoking and avoid them. Anticipate the withdrawal symptoms, which will peak at 1 to 2 weeks, which may persist for longer periods. Various forms of nicotine replacement therapies in the form of gums, lozenges, patches, nasal spray are used for smoking cessation, and also drugs like buprenorphine and varenicline. Buprenorphine is an antidepressant that inhibits the uptake of dopamine and noradrenaline, and it also is a selective antagonist for acetylcholine receptor. Varenicline is, on the other hand, is a partial agonist antagonist at nicotinic receptors. There are these things can be used in a combination for better smoking cessation. Various experimental pharmacotherapies are also there, still under trials, like nicotine vaccine, which uses a nicotine conjugate vaccine using a Pseudomonas aeruginosa endotoxin or chlorotoxin and other virus particles, and other nicotinic and acetylcholine receptor partial agonist, various forms of varenicline, etc., nicotine drops, and other forms of delivery systems are still under trials. Diabetes mellitus, every 1% increase in the glycosylate HbA1c is associated with 28% increase in the risk of PAD. American Diabetic Association guidelines recommend HbA1c levels of 7% as a treatment goal for all patients with diabetes mellitus. This is according to, in ACCORD trial, which they have used HbA1c target of 6% versus 7 to 7.9%. To reduce the cardiovascular events has showed that intensive glucose lowering strategy was found to increase the cardiovascular mortality without reducing other cardiovascular events. In various drugs can be used for glycemic control in type 2 and type 1 diabetes mellitus, but among all these drugs, only metformin has shown to decrease the diabetes related death and all cause mortality, whether in comparison of other drugs which did not show any difference in the glycemic control. In type 2 diabetes mellitus, BARI 2D trial showed that insulin sensitization strategy will be superior to reduction in the PAD, need for lower extremity revascularization and amputation. American Diabetic Association algorithm for glycemic control in type 2 diabetes mainly first initially stresses on the lifestyle modification. Later, if there is no control with that, first drug of choice is a metformin. If even with metformin it is not under control, then add an oral hypoglycemic agent. Usually sulfonylurea is preferred. The target HbA1c level is less than 7. Hypertension is another modifiable risk factor. Target blood pressure should be less than 140 by 90 mm of Hg in high risk groups, those with documented PAD, and less than 130 by 80 in patients who have diabetes or renal insufficiency. Any pharmacological agent can be used for blood pressure control, which is less important than maintaining a normotensive state is more important. So, among these drugs, AC inhibitors are particularly shown to be beneficial, as shown in the HOPE study. In HOPE trial, AC inhibitor ramipril was used. It was compared with the placebo and vitamin E drug. Reduced rates of MI, stroke, and death from cardiovascular causes was seen with the use of ramipril, and it also showed reduced rate of new diagnosis of diabetes and complications due to diabetes. Dyslipidemia. Dyslipidemia, adult treatment panel 3 LDL cholesterol goals and cutoff for therapeutic lifestyle showed that in high risk patient with coronary cardiovascular heart disease and even the risk equivalence that includes PAD and stroke patients, LDL cholesterol goal of less than 100, and you have to start the therapeutic lifestyle change and the drug therapy if it is more than 100. Similarly, based on the risk factors of smoking, hypertension, previous history of any events, family history of premature CHD, and high age, low HDL levels, they are stratified into moderate high risk and moderate risk and low risk, depending on which the target level of LDL has been proposed. Therapeutic lifestyle change is the first thing that comes into place in dyslipidemia. This includes the LDL raising nutrients like saturated fat should be less than 7% of total calories, dietary cholesterol should be less than 200, and therapeutic option for lowering the LDL includes the plant sterols 2 grams per day, increased fiber diet, total calories has to be adjusted to the desirable weight required, and physical activity that moderate exercise to expend at least 200 kilocalories per day. Various drug therapies for dyslipidemia to achieve the target LDL includes the statins. These are the HMG coenzyme A reductase inhibitors, niacin, niacin, bile acid sequestrants like cholestyramine, cholestyramine, and even the fibrates, ezetimibe that inhibits the intestinal absorption of cholesterol, and CETP, cholesterol ester transferase protein inhibitors. There are novel therapeutic agents now like PCSK9 inhibitors that inhibits the degradation of the LDL receptors over the surface, that thereby increases the uptake of LDL cholesterol from the bloodstream and decreases the LDL levels. And other drugs for familial hypercholesterolemia includes like microsomal triglyceride transfer protein inhibitor, antisense. These are newer drugs that are not routinely used. Among these, only statin has a pleiotropic effects. Like it also, in addition to lipid lowering abilities, it also has an ability to stabilize the existing atherosclerotic plaque, decreases the oxidative stress, reduces the vascular inflammation, and also protects against the thrombosis by altering the lipid content of the platelets, thereby reducing the platelet aggregability. There are various trials that have showed the benefit of the statins in atherosclerotic disease and even including the peripheral arterial disease. Heart protection study, the largest study that was the first one to show the benefit of statins. It decreases the various cardiovascular events compared to placebo. Peripheral arterial disease was one of them. There are various studies, other studies like Scandinavian study, Jupiter trial, all those showed the benefit of statins. Hyperhomocystinemia has been shown in multiple ways to cause arterial disease like endothelial dysfunction and injury, platelet activation, production of reactive oxygen like hydrogen peroxide, increase in factor 12 and 5, inhibition of protein C. However, in vitamin intervention or stroke prevention trial, the cause of hyperhomocystinemia in these premature atherosclerosis was questioned, and the benefit of high-dose folic acid therapy for homocystinemia did not show any prevention of the stroke, but still homocysteine levels are measured in case of recurrent venous stroke in young people or recurrent DVTs in atypical DVT, and still this folic acid and B12 replacement therapy is still given. Antiplatelet therapy is mainly to decrease the secondary cardiovascular and cerebrovascular events. Various trials have been conducted for the antiplatelet therapy in asymptomatic PAD, symptomatic PAD, and post-revascularization, that is surgical or endovascular. One of the main trials are the Capri trial that showed clopidogrel versus aspirin in prevention of ischemic events. Clopidogrel decreased the cumulative event rate by 5.32%, aspirin 5.83%, a relative risk reduction of 8.7% that showed clopidogrel to be better than aspirin when a single antiplatelet drug is indicated. Approach to an antiplatelet therapy. In asymptomatic patients, usually single antiplatelet is considered, that is aspirin. Symptomatic patients for all, with a history of previous coronary stent or acute coronary syndrome, dual antiplatelet therapy is considered. Rest of the symptomatic PAD patients, single antiplatelet therapy, aspirin or clopidogrel. As per Capri trial, clopidogrel is preferred to aspirin. Aspirin plus rivaroxaban as shown in the COMPASS trial, like it is beneficial to decrease the male and males. Post-revascularization, post-surgical revascularization, still a single antiplatelet therapy or a combination of rivaroxaban as per the Voyager PAD trial is indicated. In post-endovascular revascularization, dual antiplatelet therapy are indicated for more than mother or equal to 1 month up to 6 months and followed by single antiplatelet therapy. Intensive in case of high limb risk like prosthetic bypass is done, below knee bypass with suboptimal conduit and poor arterial runoff. Still antithrombotic therapy, a combination of rivaroxaban or a warfarin or a dual antiplatelet therapy is indicated. As per guidelines, SVS, AHA, ACC, and European Society, Vascular Society, there is a difference in the asymptomatic PAD. SVS guidelines do not recommend any antiplatelet therapy, but antiplatelet therapy is indicated as per AHA and ESC. Symptomatic PAD, single antiplatelet therapy. In post-surgical revascularization, single as I already told. Rest of the things are same. Now, treatment of PAD based on the symptoms. Intermittent claudication, mainly our goal is to provide a relief of symptoms for the patient. Various drugs, pharmacological drugs therapy, exercise therapy, and revascularization is indicated in case of failed medical management or severe disability causing lifestyle limitation. Critical limb ischemia includes the wound care, antibiotics, revascularization strategies, that is endovascular or surgical. Our main goal is to promote the limb survival and the overall survival. Coming to exercise therapy. Exercise therapy is the best initial treatment for intermittent claudication, level 1A recommendation as per AHA-ACC guidelines. In exercise therapy, supervised exercise therapy is better than the home-based exercise therapy. Exercise training overall improves the muscle metabolism and vasodilation, increase the blood supply, improves the endothelial function, and even improve the rheology and improve the vascular angiogenesis and reduced inflammation also. Exercise therapy when compared to placebo as by Gardner et al. Trial, onset of claudication pain and maximal claudication pain are still delayed in exercise therapy. Guidelines for exercise therapy are mainly a treadmill or walking 30 to 45 minutes per session, 3 to 4 times a week, at least for 12 weeks. As the patient can tolerate, the time per each session can be gradually increased until a maximum tolerable pain is achieved during the exercise period. Limitations are the main limitation is a patient complaints and patient refusal and the comorbid medical conditions where the patient cannot perform exercise. One of the landmark trial is a CLEVER trial that compared patients with hemodynamically significant aortoiliac disease that randomized to optimal medical care alone, stent revascularization, and supervised exercise. In the results, change in the peak walking time is at 6 months were compared. It is 1.2 minutes for optimal medical care, 3.7 minutes for stent, and 5.8 minutes for supervised exercise. That is maximal for the supervised exercise. But the quality of life was measured, which was highest for stenting, intermediate for supervised exercise, and lowest for medical therapy alone. Other pharmacological treatment for claudication only 2 drugs are FDA approved. They are the pentoxifylline and cilastazole. Others are the drugs that change the tissue metabolism like naftidopril and levocarnitin, enhance production of nitric oxide like L-arginine, vasodilatory effects of statins, glufomedil, prostaglandins, angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors that is a ramipril and K134. These still are not FDA approved. Pentoxifylline is a methylxanthine derivative that improves the oxygen delivery mainly by the rheolytic effect on the RBC, wall flexibility, and deformability. It also inhibits the thromboxane synthesis and platelet aggregation, and also inhibits phosphodiesterase and potentiates the effects of endogenous prostacyclin. It even has a immunomodulatory effects. The dosing recommendations of pentoxifylline begin at 400 milligram orally thrice daily and can be increased up to 1800 milligrams per day. Compared to placebo, pentoxifylline has shown improved in the pain-free walking distance and for the patients, but that is not the statistical benefit does not translate into a clinical benefit, and even the effect of this drug in patient is very unpredictable, and we have to we cannot surely tell which patient responds to this drug and which patient does not. Cilastazole is another drug that increases the walking distance. It is a phosphodiesterase 3 inhibitor that increases cyclic AMP and inhibits the smooth muscle cell contraction and platelet aggregation, even decreases smooth muscle cell proliferation. It has an effect on the lipid levels also by decreasing the serum triglycerides and increases the HDL. Modulates the synthesis of VEGF also. It is mainly contraindicated in patients of congestive heart failure. Usually it is started at a low dose of 50 milligram per day in the first week and gradually increased as the patient may tolerate the side effects mainly of headache, flushing, etc. Maximal walking distance in a study by Dawson et al. When it compared cilastazole pentoxifylline with the placebo, cilastazole has a maximum benefit. Next is a pentoxifylline and next placebo. However, the adverse events are more like headache, diarrhea, abnormal stools, palpitations are more with cilastazole when compared to pentoxifylline. When a patient does not tolerate cilastazole, pentoxifylline can be given to the patient. Statins also have an effect on the maximum walking time in PAD when compared to placebo. Even pain-free walking time was improved with statins compared to placebo. Next, when you are planning for any treatment or any revascularization strategy for any patient, you have to define the treatment success. Initially, treatment outcomes were mainly based on the graft patency, stent patency. They usually do not correlate well with the clinical improvement or the limb preservation. Uh, and other limb are the patient-centered outcomes like amputation-free survival, freedom from major amputation, reintervention. There are safety outcomes and efficacy outcomes. Safety outcomes are male and mace, and efficacy outcome like amputation free survival, reintervention rate, limb salvage survival, overall survival. There's a recent shift in the focus of the technical outcomes to patient centered outcome for patients undergoing revascularization. Too commonly used in, especially when it is different for a claudicant and a patient with CLTA undergoing revascularization. In claudicant, mainly is the patient benefit like mainly of more of a health profile like SF-36 survey or Nottingham health profile, like overall quality of life, how it is improved by the treatment when compared to critical limb ischemia, where this patency rates and ulcer healing rates all come into play. SF-36 and Nottingham Health Scale are used, or a PAD specific questionnaire like walking impairment questionnaire for claudicant patient, vascular quality of life to the patient with CLTA was used in PREVENT 3 trial. In critical limb ischemia, a study by Taylor et al. Showed that where 331 patients with Rutherford class 5 and 6 were seen, they defined clinical success as bypass patency until wound healing occurred, limb salvage at least 1 year, maintenance of ambulatory status for at least 1 year, and survival. Uh, Graft patency and limb salvage rates are around 72 to 73%, but clinical success rate by this definition was only 44%. Like there is a difference between the technical success and the clinical success. Okay, there are risk factor modification, medical therapy, open surgery, primary amputation, endovascular therapy. Which patient to choose what? There are guidelines based on the anatomical classification of the disease, severity of the disease, based on conduit availability, and even the patient's functional status. Coming to anatomical disease classification, Bollinger classification was used in the Basel trial and was a part of Basel trial survival model, Basel 1 trial. It is a complex calculation including 18 segments with 4 types like stenosis less than 25%, less 25 to 50, or complete occlusion. It usually shows the overall burden of atherosclerosis but does not guide in any treatment method. SVS runoff score is mainly useful for bypass surgery where the distal vessel runoff is seen. Next is a task classification. Task classification is divided into iotoiliac and femoropopliteal. There are various classes. This is mainly focused on the segment or the lesion. It is useful for comparing various device performance in that lesion, but usually it's less useful in guiding the treatment as a overall combining the patient status and the limb status. It does not address combined or multi-level disease. It fails to integrate the total path of revascularization for CLI. Bollinger score, task 2, SVS runoff score, useful for bypass. And next is a calcium scoring system that like mild, moderate, severe based on the circumference. Mainly, it has impact on the technical success or patency following open surgery or uh, endovascular intervention, but proper validated scoring system and its outcome is still not present. And the lesion length category are short, intermediate, and long. Need for stenting and patency mainly for endovascular procedures. The task 2, where lesion-based approach for treatment of iotoiliac disease. A is the endovascular procedure of choice. B, endovascular is a preferred therapy. C is surgery is preferred for good risk patient, and D, surgery is a procedure of choice. Similarly, for femoropopliteal disease also, A, A is endovascular is preferred choice, and D, surgery is a preferred choice. B and C based on the patient risk. The latest guidelines, the Global Vascular Guidelines for CLTI, this integrates the patient preoperate patient status, limb status, and also the anatomical stage complexity of the disease. It is based on the plan concept. Patient risk stratification includes the peri-procedural risk and life expectancy. Patient is divided into an average risk patient or a high risk patient, and the limb threat severity, the Wi-Fi staging system, and GLASS, the anatomic staging system. All these three are integrated in a decision, taking a patient decision for revascularization. Wi-Fi staging includes the wound, ischemia, and foot infection that are graded as 0, 1, 2, 3. Based on this, it gives the risk, they are again staged into 1, 2, 3, 4. That gives the risk of amputation as very low, low, moderate, high, based on which the revascularization decision can be taken. Hiato-iliac disease and CFA disease are considered as inflow disease, and they are graded as only 1, 2 based on stenosis or complete occlusion. Inframalleolar or pedal descriptor was also given in these guidelines like P0, P1 or P2, but these entities were not integrated in the overall outcomes. Class stage for femoropopliteal grading system and infrapopliteal disease are graded as 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 based on the lesion length. And it is a CTO or involving the flush occlusion or not. Class, they are staged into 1, 2, 3 based on the FP grade and an IP grade into low complexity, intermediate complexity, and high complexity disease. These stages, they have told the immediate technical failure and limb-based patency based on this. In low complexity, it is familiar technical failure is less than 10% and 1 year limb-based patency is more than 70. It is least for high complexity disease. Failure rate is more than 20% and 1 year limb-based patency is less than 50%. Based on the Wi-Fi stage and the GLASS stage, they have given indications for open bypass or endovascular or no revascularization. This GLASS is based on the target artery pathway that includes the FP segment and infrapopliteal segment. In this case, it is an anterior tibial artery, which is a target artery pathway. The limb-based patency is also told based on the patency of this target artery pathway. The overall summary of this vascular guidelines is a patient with a critical limb ischemia based on ABI and limb status. Then Wi-Fi staging is done. If Wi-Fi staging is stage 1 with low limb risk, usually we consider wound care and surveillance. If it is intermediate or high, more than or equal to 2, we consider the candidate for revascularization. Based on functional status of the individual, primary amputation is also a treatment modality and wound care. Estimate the peri-procedural risk and 2-year survival. Patient is considered a high average risk patient or high risk patient. Instead, consider revascularization. GLASS staging is done based on a high risk patient. Endovascular is perform endovascular intervention if possible, and depend in standard risk patient or average risk patient, determine the vein conduit and revascularization according to the strategy. There are still limitations of these guidelines also, where there is no validated scoring system for calcification. Pedal interventions remain relatively uncommon and outcomes of those are not predicted. They are not studied. Benefits of revascularization, multiple infrapopliteal arteries needs further studies. Complex relationship between hemodynamic and clinical success, and this study has not showed the relationship and the outcomes. And even the outcomes of surgical bypass are not reported. Based on presentation, whether it is claudication or CLTI, mainly claudication, there is low relative risk of limb loss and compared to significant relative risk of MI, stroke or death. Cardiovascular risk factor modification and medical therapy are the best initial treatment. Risk to benefit ratio favors initial medical therapy in most cases. Revascularization is recommended only in case of severe claudication and only if the medical therapy has failed. Endovascular therapy is often preferred to open surgery in most cases of claudication. CLTI, again, it is based on medical therapy versus revascularization, limb amputation versus revascularization, or endovascular treatment versus open surgery. Revascularization is considered in all cases of CLTI. Limb amputation, usually in patients with a poor functional status and overwhelming infection, non-reconstructible disease. Primary amputation is also a modality of treatment. Endovascular versus open surgery. Open surgery, usually for complex multi-level PAD, shows a superior patency, increased perioperative morbidity, longer hospitalization. Endovascular treatment, the focal, usually best in focal lesions in the larger arteries like iliac arteries with good outflow, but there is limited patency rates, low morbidity and mortality. Reintervention rates are high. There is an entity called situational perfusion enhancement. These patients are usually asymptomatic with subclinical lower extremity ischemia. Their API is less than 0.9, but still they are asymptomatic because of the functional status. But with low, they tolerate this very low perfusion pressure. But in case of incidental foot ulceration, they do not have the circulatory reserve for it to heal. In such situations, situational perfusion enhancement can be done. Usually in iliac lesions, endovascular intervention is the preferred thing. Endovascular treatment versus open surgery trials. BASIL trial was a landmark trial that compared 450 patients randomized to bypass and balloon angioplasty for infrainguinal disease. It supports a phenomenon of situation perfusion enhancement. Patients' life expectancy or the course of the disease will exceed 2 years. Surgery is probably the most appropriate first intervention. Patients who cannot have a vein bypass are preferably better served by endovascular therapy in the first instance than the prosthetic bypass. Angioplasty and open surgery are not either or therapies but are complement. An endovascular first approach is not necessarily a free shot, as the success of subsequent bypass may be compromised with a failed endovascular therapy. There are several ongoing trials to show endovascular therapy is best or the best surgical therapy is the best CLI, BASIL 2 and BASIL 3 trial. BASIL 2 compares vein bypass or endovascular first still is these are under recruiting phase. BASIL 3 trial is compares the various modalities forms of endovascular therapy like brain balloon angioplasty plus or minus metallic stent or a DCB or DES, amputation-free survival and the quality of life functional status are being compared. These trials are under recruiting phase. Based on the conduit availability of adequate conduit for open bypass plays a critical role. Usually GSV of adequate caliber is a conduit of choice. In the absence of GSV, adequate vein bypass, endovascular revascularization becomes a more attractive option before you go for a prosthetic bypass. Alternative vein options like cephalic vein, basilic vein, short saphenous vein can be used. Risk prediction models. These are to know the functional status of the individual and how best the patient can tolerate these procedures like open surgical or endovascular procedure. There is no ideal risk prediction model that is easy to calculate and directly gives the which we can interpret that helps in outcome prediction. There are various FinVask, Prevent 3, Basal prediction model, VQI derived various entities like advanced stage, coronary artery disease, diabetes mellitus, obesity, CKD, all these anatomical factors, functional status, various risk prediction models are there that predict the mortality, amputation-free survival, etc. But there is no ideal risk prediction model. Other non-revascularization treatments for CLT are limb spinal cord stimulation for ulcer, reducing the pain, lumbar sympathectomy for ulcer healing, intermittent pneumatic compression, pharmacotherapy using prostacyclines, wound therapy like hyperbaric oxygen therapy, and therapeutic angiogenesis. Angiogenesis, therapeutic angiogenesis is an effort to increase the concentration of proangiogenic factors by stimulating the growth of new blood vessels in the ischemic tissue. This can be accomplished by administration of recombinant proteins, that is, the growth factors, or the gene therapy that induce the expression of these factors. May be induced by implantation of stem cells or endothelial progenital cells. There are several trials for various growth factors and the cells like Restore CLI. All these trials are still ongoing or still the results are not out like we implement this in the regular practice. There are future developments like pharmacological treatment for revascularization of ischemic tissue, genomic mapping, therapeutic ultrasound, immunomodulators, viral directed gene transfers are still under research. Decision analysis, this is it's a final thing that now we know the various forms of treatment, various modality of treatment, how each one behaves. We have to take a decision based on this decision analysis, where there are no fixed trials, like the multiple trials, but no proper one trial to guide us in the treatment. Then we make a decision analysis chart like this, and whatever suits best for the patient, we have to select. Another thing is the quali, like more cost effectiveness. We have to select a procedure that is least costly and most effective for the patient. Thank you.